Communication options. There are many ways to communicate during an emergency. You need to be able to get information from the outside world, communicate within your group, and communicate with anyone else. And here we're going to talk about options for each of those applications. Now, for inbound communication, that's like finding out about the news. That's like what you would find out these days on your via YouTube, via your newspaper, other social media, people's websites. When all that goes down, though, and you still need to get communication from the inbound, what's going on, what's the news, well, all right. You can send someone out to go do a recon run and find out what's going on in town. That's an option. NOAA weather radio. There are a number of the U.S. government manages, National Weather Service manages a number of transmitter towers that transmit weather data, but that's also all hazards radio as well. So if there's ever any type of hazard in your area, they're supposed to broadcast it on those weather radio stations. And there's, as I last figured out, there was like 5 of them that are normally using, but I've seen up to 12 different frequencies that were designated for it. Just depends on who you're looking at, but as far as what I've seen, as far as what they report the frequencies are, only channels 1 through 5 appear to be used. So you get a weather radio and you try and tune it to whichever the channel is that comes in best, and that's what should work for you. And they're transmitting all the time. They're usually transmitting a weather report all the time, so you can find them now and have your radio tuned in. That way, if you do need it later on, you can set it there. And some of those radios are even set up with an alarm type system, that when they give an emergency broadcast, it will come on for you and tell you that, and then it will turn off. That way you're not inundated with the weather report all the time. You can just hear if there is something that's worth hearing, and whenever they're talking about the temperature and the forecast, you don't hear that. So they have a setting for those on some radios. There's also AM radio and FM radio, and those are separated because some radios support one or the other. I've got some radios that only do AM. I've got some radios that only do FM. And then shortwave is kind of a little bit more specialized. I don't have as many radios that talk shortwave, but shortwave is also an option as well. Shortwave travels for a longer distance. FM is probably longer than AM radio, is your FM radio, but shortwave is the longest distance. It's a low frequency range, and it can really travel for a good distance. So you can hear radio reports from a ways off from over shortwave. Now, internal communication options. This deals with in your group or within your neighborhood or whatever your group is. So, yeah, you can have a bulletin, chalk or dry erase board where you can post notes up there or write notes. Those are options. They don't require any power. They do require some ink and paper or whatever else you're going to use for that, some chalk. And they require everyone coming to a common point. So that's good for kind of giving the news brief of the day, but not really getting out in emergency communication. Field phone, that's the type of phone where it's just a wired pair. You just run a twisted pair between two phones. You generally get them from like military surplus. And you just crank it on one end and it rings the other end. Does not require, most of them, I think most of them you don't require any type of battery to run. They're just crank powered. It's just a dynamo in there when you crank it. Actually, they might be requiring some battery on some of them. FRS radio, but yeah, definitely here, that's an option there, and that's great to make sure you don't have any. The real advantage with a field phone is you don't have any thing that you're listening to outside of that network. They'd actually have to splice into that phone to hear your communication. So that would be very private. If you're using FRS or MERS radio, FRS is a short range. Both of these are license free. You don't need a license to run either one of these two. You don't need an FCC license, you just need to buy the radios. FRS has 22 channels, MERS has 3 to 5 depending on the radio. And they are short range walkie-talkies, basically. FRS is shorter range than MERS. MERS will transmit a little bit further, but FRS is good for, quarter mile or so, and it's good for inside the house or inside the neighborhood, but not too many houses over. And so, yeah, that's for internal within your group. External communication options. This means when you need to get messages out to other groups or other people, whatever they be. You can physically send someone out there who's a messenger and go deliver a message. CB radio does not require a license, but it's also not private, just like the other two radios were on the last one. It just sprays that message out there and anyone who's listening can hear it. It does not require a license. None of these radios are private. Messenger is the only thing that's really kind of private. As long as your messenger's good, as long as you can trust him, it's private. Him or her. CB radio. No license is required, but that's kind of a short range. You got 40 channels on that. And it's kind of a common radio too, I feel. It seems like a number of people have CBs still. It was very popular for a long time, so there's a lot of people that probably have CB radios. Now, GMRS radio has 22 channels, just like the FRS does, and they correspond with the FRS frequencies. But to use a GMRS radio, it depends on how the radio is certified. GMRS is higher power and can transmit further. It's also got protocols in the GMRS radio that allow it to use the repeater capability. So with repeaters, you can talk for a lot longer than the distance of just 2 walkies or even, a base station. And they can be vehicle mounted, because these guys, they can go up to 50 watts. You can get a good probably 40 miles of range out of one of those radios. CB, you're not going to get that. You're going to get a few miles. But this requires a license, the GMRS. The CB does not. It's freely available. GMRS requires a license, does not require a test, and is a family license. One person gets licensed in a family, everyone else in the immediate family is licensed under the same call sign. Now, ham does not really use preset channels. It requires a license and it requires a test that is for the individual. And you can run a lot stronger power on there. You can actually bounce a signal off the moon and talk on the other side of the world with it. Those are strong radios. They require a license, they require a test, and you've got to figure out it's done by frequency. It's not done by channel. It's pretty much any open frequency for what they are designated for. They can use. They create their own channels within the ranges which they're allowed to use them. So those are different options. And these ones that do require a license, you don't need a license to listen. You can turn on the radio and listen to it. You only need a license when you're going to be transmitting and talking on such a device. So you can listen and still get an idea on what's going on, just don't talk. There is an exception. If it's an emergency, it needs to be risk to life or property, and there needs to be no other way to have gotten that message out otherwise. If your phone's working right there next to you, that does not permit you to use an unlicensed radio. But if your life is in danger and there's no other way to get that communication out, there's a forest fire and there's no other way to call for help, no other way, risk to life and property, FCC allows you to use whatever you have at that time. Thanks for watching.